welcome to RPG Unlimited, a podcast about tabletop gaming. My name is Chimera, and I'll be interviewing players, game masters, artists, game designers, developers, and content creators within the tabletop role-playing game space for their unique views and processes when they play and or create role-playing games and content. This week we are talking with Ryan Boelter, creator of Chimera RPG and co-host of Character Creation Cast. You can check out his work at https://chimerapbta.wordpress.com and at https://www.charactercreationcast.com. So, with all that, hello Ryan, how are you today? Awesome. So, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Like you said, I'm Ryan Boelter. I go by Lord Neptune online usually. I am a 38-year-old that has recently gotten back into the gaming hobby. I started way back in 1993 with my friends, and I had taken quite the hiatus after college once all my friends had moved away. And now with the invention of the internet being so ubiquitous amongst people and speeds being an adequate thing that you can actually do these face-to-face communications easily, I'm starting to play online more. And it's pretty sweet. I'm a computer programmer, and yeah, I do a lot of things.
That's really, really, really cool. I know, internet speeds making things possible, internet prices making things possible, just internet making so much of our lives now what they are is a big thing.
It's so much nicer to be able to just reach out to people in the community and say, hey, I've got time Friday night. I don't have any friends in my local community. Does anybody want to play a game with me? And if you're in the right community, you're going to have a lot of people that are like, yeah, hey, I'm free. Let's do something.
Yeah.
And you can just hop on the mics at the very least, hop on video chat if you got it, and just play games, tell stories, have fun, bond with people across the world. And it's pretty sweet.
Yeah. Oh, man. I can remember growing up and, before you even had the ability to play with different people on consoles in a house other than your own, I remember LAN parties. I remember when internet cafes and huge banks of computers and being able to play with everyone in just that one spot even was a really big deal. So
it was huge. My first experience trying to network two computers together was me bringing my giant desktop over to my friend's house in like 1995. And I was like, oh yeah, there's this null modem thing. So that's got to be where we can just hook our computers up together, right? Well, I had no idea what I was doing. Trying to play Warcraft 1 with each other and not being able to hook anything up together when we were in person instead of dialing into one another. We thought it was going to be so cool, and it was just a complete failure.
There was definitely a learning curve there.
So
I know it was a game changer, and then to have it to the point where with tools like Roll20, where you can even play from mobile, like that one, even 10 years ago, would have been a wild idea to throw out there. So.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And having dice at your fingertips everywhere you go is just phenomenal. If you wanted to play a quick pickup game with some coworkers over lunch, or with friends if you're going to college together, just wherever, I think it's really cool that things are so much more accessible nowadays.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. uh, it took me a little while to figure out how Roll20 worked
Yeah.
because it was confusing, and it's like, understandably, because in a way it is its own language when you're playing games via that, or you can play
Yeah.
games via Discord now, or use Twitter for play-by-post, and use the polls for like, all right, what's your character gonna do? I mean, yes, you kind of limit it
Oh
with
yeah.
options if you play that way. You don't have to, but you can. You can be like,
Mm-hmm.
this character most likely would have like these 4 things they're most likely to do, and just
Yeah.
that's fun to run. That's fun to run.
Yeah, I've seen a few of my friends do that, and I'm like, no, it was like 2 hours ago, and I missed like half the adventure. No.
Yeah. Also creates interesting ways for players to make their entrance too, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
definitely a far cry from the old Yahoo roleplay rooms.
Oh yeah. Oh, I can imagine.
Oh, I remember when I was in for a long time, and I look back, and I was never able to get a game going in high school,
Mm-hmm.
far as Dungeons and Dragons or any tabletop game with anyone local, but we were able to do, it was a Gundam Wing inspired one that I was in
Oh,
at the
cool.
time. And I look back and I cringe and I'm like, yeah, there's my first edgelord teenager. You can't beat my character game. And of course, everyone in the room played that way. That's just what you did.
Yep.
So, you're co-host of Character Creation Cast. Do you care to tell us a little more about that?
Oh, absolutely. This is a passion project that kind of just came out of nowhere at the very, very beginning of last year. Literally January 3rd. I think it was late at night, and I was like, wouldn't it be cool if there was a podcast out there that you just create characters with cool people for different games, and you could call it like, and I was like trying to think what's a good alliteration. Character create cast. That was that. Okay, sure. Send tweet. And then like a couple hours later, I'm talking to some friends of mine on Twitter. And we've got this like podcast support group that is just like a couple dozen people in there, and I'm like, this idea is just like, does it exist? And people are like, I don't think it exists in that form. And I'm like, well, I have to do it, right? And I'm like, well, okay, it's late. I'll sleep on it. Very next day, I'm like, I can't get this out of my head. I have to do this. And people were just saying, yes, do it, do it. And one voice in particular was especially enthusiastic about the idea. One, Amelia Antrim. Uh, and I said, hey, I DM'd her. I said, hey, you seemed extremely enthusiastic about this idea, and I think it would work really well with a co-host, a dedicated co-host. Would you want to join me on this and see what happens? And she said yes. And basically, that's how it got started. It's 2 people who love character creation for any role-playing game. We just love the idea of making these people and fleshing them out and giving them backstories and just making them really cool and really fun and intriguing to play. And then we never play them.
Oh
no! You know, that's like the running thing. It's like we invite these really cool people onto our show, right? And we cover different game systems every month, and we create these awesome characters, these awesome groups. We tie their stories together. It's really great. And then we talk about how the process went, and then we never play them.
that kind of reminds me of setting up those few games, because it's not like there wasn't anyone that wanted to play. We just couldn't sit together after creating our characters to actually get started.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of that process of, okay, we're going to create these characters, and here's these backstories, and here's how we're going to weave them together, and we'll set a date later for when we play, and
never happens. Yeah, so it actually turned out to be really cool because it turned into a good lesson in how to run session zeros for these different games, as well as teaching people what these games are like through the lens of character creation. So not only do we create characters, we discuss the game a little bit before we create characters, so we know what we're kind of getting into, right? We lay the groundwork. Then we dive into our character creation segment and just go through the stuff. What's cool is the people that we invite on the show, they know these systems pretty much inside and out. So they're quote unquote the experts that we have on, and they're teaching us the system as we create the characters. And then after our characters are all done in the third part, it's usually split into 3 parts. The first 2 are setting the groundwork and creating characters. And the third part is just discussing the process, discussing the game, just sitting back, relaxing, and talking with each other about how all of this went in kind of a structured format. Amelia's wonderful at outlines, and she created some of the best outlines I have seen, and they make the show run very smoothly, which is really nice. But it's just a nice, relaxing time, and it's cool that we're teaching people about these systems, and not only that, teaching people about other podcasts out there, because we'll have podcasters on and people that run actual plays for the different game systems that we cover. And we hear feedback all the time of, wow, it is such a good episode, and these guests that you had on, I have to check out their podcast now. And shining that light on other people is absolutely what I'm all about. And having that be a nice little thing that came out of this is just such a bonus to me. I really, really enjoy that part. But we also have game developers on with the games that they've developed, and we dive into their systems a little bit differently. We actually ask them a little harder questions, like, why did you design these things a certain way? And my favorite question to ask them is, what's the biggest flaw in character creation? So we always get their, hot takes on their own games, which is really cool.
That is cool. Oh. And a lot of people don't think of that. I know I had Chris Locke on a while back about Retroverse, and boy, that is not a question I asked.
Yeah. But yeah, and I mean that's a game I would love to cover. There's so many games out there. We put together a preliminary list of games we wanted to cover. We had 60 items before we even recorded an episode.
Oh, I can imagine that.
and that's 1 game per month, right? So we had like 5 years of content before we even started, which is just wild. So we went from that idea, that solid base, and probably about half a month into releasing the episodes, we said, what if we started a Patreon, right? What sort of content would we want for the Patreon? And we came up with this idea of character evolution cast, right? This is segments that we don't create characters. We help teach people how to be better players, basically. There we go.
It's another way to do it. Like, I think a lot of people, their first characters could be very different, because I think a lot of people, their first character is very similar to a lot of other people's, just because it's like, we want to do all the coolest things, and in our minds, the only way to do the coolest thing is a lot of times to try to be the most powerful person on the board. It's almost competitive with those first games.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because things that we dive into on the Character Evolution Cast episodes are things like how to do character voices safely. Like, there's a lot of people that are going to be like, well, I'm going to be voicing a dragon, so I'm going to get really, really deep, really, really awful sounding, right? But that's going to destroy your voice. So we actually talked to James D'Amato about what techniques are there to safely do voices like that, like talking deeper into your chest or into your stomach to give you that deep voice instead of really hurting your throat, you know, changing your posture, things like that. And we reached out to James before, you know, we had everything solidified for this idea. And that interaction blew both of our minds. Amelia was at work, sent the email, right? And thought, you know, James is kind of notorious for not getting back right away. So I'm just going to send this email off. We know he's really good with improv. We know he's good with voices. So he would be great for this episode. And we know that our listeners thought character voices was a cool topic to cover first for this idea. 15 minutes after the email was sent, James replied, "Hey, I would love to do this. Why don't we record it in my studio in Chicago, live together? And I'm 3 hours north of Chicago, and Amelia's like an hour and a half north of Chicago. And by the way, I want you on my network, the One Shot Podcast Network." And we're like, yeah. It was mind blowing because we were 3 series in at that point. We had released 2 series on launch day, 6 episodes, all at once. That was over 6 hours of content day one. And then we took a week break and released 1 per week, effectively. So the plan was 3 weeks on, take a break. Well, then we met with James. We got on the network, which is really cool. And we made Character Evolution Cast a part of the show instead of premium content. So now on the off weeks, instead of releasing nothing, we release player advice. So we can actually have a constant stream of really cool stuff for people to listen to every single week. And we try to keep it relaxed. We try to keep it chill. If you listen to pretty much anything after that initial block of 6 episodes, it opens with some nice piano music, nice, like, just Amelia and I talking in the cold open about some announcements, and we get into talking with the guests, and it's a very nice, easy listen. People like my lower octave voice for some reason. So it's cool. I love everything that's come out of it and all of the opportunities that have come out of taking this idea, this 11 p.m. idea that I randomly posted on Twitter, forming it with Amelia, and 4 months later launching our first episodes. That was just wild.
I can imagine. I think I've experienced similar, and I think a lot of us who make content can say that we've experienced similar with the either late night, early morning, wild hair idea that we throw out on Twitter. And I honestly think that might be one of the places that is probably the best idea to throw those ideas out on, because of the community there, because people get so excited and they're like, yeah, do the thing. I want to see this thing. Give me now. And it's like, shh, you gotta wait. You gotta wait a little bit. It's an idea right now.
Uh-huh.
But since you're interested, now I've got to think more on it and refine it, and then you can have the thing.
Yeah. So this idea came when my son was just over a year old. And was it 2 years? Goodness gracious. I think it was 2 years. I can't remember. I lose track of days nowadays because I have two kids, and one is just turning 10 months old, and she is adorable. But what was interesting is before I had this idea, before I even thought about getting into podcasting, I helped out with the website for the Dungeon Masters block, which is part of the Block Party Podcast Network, which they had started. They had a few podcasts on there, and I think like one, maybe two podcasts that weren't initially part of their, space that they created. And they were having website issues, and I said, hey, I do web design. I can do web design. I don't do it professionally, but I can do it. Do you need some help? And they said, yeah, that would be awesome. So I helped them get their website back up and running, as well as helped redesign their website to make it more streamlined and more easy to use, and made the content more, front and center. And that worked out really well. And from there, they said, hey, do you want to help out with Geek Wars Season 2, which is a trivia game show for geek teams, I guess, where you talk about different, there's different topics and stuff different categories, and you just answer questions and then you go through the rounds. And I was like, yeah, sure, that'd be awesome, but I don't really have a good mic. So I started with just a headset mic. And then I'm like, okay, this sounds horrible. I need something better. Well, Mitch, who's the head of the network, said, hey, if you get a mic, don't worry about it. We'll cover that with our Patreon money, because it'd be really cool to have you on here. And, quality matters. So I got a Yeti, the same Yeti I'm using right now. And from there, I was hooked. I was like, this is cool. I want to do more of this. But I didn't really think much of it. Recordings of Geek Wars Live was few and far between, because scheduling is a nightmare for 4 guests and a guest host and another guest judge and the host itself. That's a lot of people.
That is.
So we had to record the whole season over, I think, almost a year it took to get all 10 episodes recorded, which is, not that many episodes, but scheduling. If you do podcasts with guests, scheduling can be a nightmare. And I've learned that the easy way and the hard way, right? So I went from that to, hey, let me do my own podcast. Now I'm thinking about doing another podcast. But this one where I don't have to talk. It's going to be an audio drama, which is going to be fun. But now I'm also thinking about doing a kind of playtest podcast for my game, where I want to record some sessions with a bunch of different cool people in the community, help shine a spotlight on their projects, while simultaneously showing off the project that I've been working on.
That sounds like a really cool way to get the word out there on that.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds awesome. And
Yeah.
wow, a bit of a journey and a lot of really cool people you've gotten to work with by the sounds of it.
It's true. And I guess the lesson I want people to take from this is it literally started with me saying, hey, can I help you? I've got these skills, you have a need. Is it possible that I can help you? And I just asked. The podcasters are people, you know, even celebrities are people. But if you ask, there's a good chance, if you're asking the right people, that you're going to get pushed into this direction that takes you into this really wild and fun ride that you never would have imagined yourself getting into a year or two prior.
I can agree with that. I think I've already experienced a little bit of that.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely not so much with the scheduling thing. For me, scheduling has been a lot easier, but I think it's because I throw it out in terms of, hey, these are the available dates.
Yes.
Choose one. Okay, this is what I've got left to the next person, and just on down the line. And then, like, okay, so if you're one of the ones that's further out, I'll pencil you in, and then a week prior or so, I'll reach out to you again and confirm. Yeah. Since it is getting out there, and it gets, you never know, and maybe a person forgets or whatever.
Yep.
So
I am learning that having a set day and time that you record these things is really, really nice. Like, so nice for both yourself and your guests, because you can say, this is the only time I'm available for this project. Are you in? If not, that's fine. You know, you asked and they said, well, no, I'm sorry, I can't. You find there's plenty of people out there to talk to, and plenty of people to schedule around your schedule. You don't need to break your back trying to bend over backwards for everybody out there when you can have your own schedule and do your own pace and not stress over everything, because there's enough stress in life. We don't need stress in our hobbies either.
Completely agree with that.
Yeah.
So what were some of the challenges you faced at the offset?
So obviously editing was interesting because I had never edited before. Amelia and I had actually did some test recordings of the first series that we wanted to cover. And we wanted to just start with Dungeons and Dragons because that's the big one. That's the one that everybody has heard of, if not, played, right? So we did 2 test runs, to test our microphones, to make sure that we had them set up correctly, to make sure that we weren't having some weird background noises, and to make sure that even like the settings in the program that we were using, Audacity, to record it, to make sure that the settings were correct. Turns out that my microphone didn't like the default setting for Audacity at one point. I don't know when that changed, because now it works just fine with it, but it had produced a buzzing sound that I didn't know where it was coming from. But as soon as I swapped that one little setting, that buzz went away and it was crystal clear. So one thing, if people are listening out there right now that want to get into this sort of thing, get into podcasting, test your stuff before you get into it, because if you go and hit record that first time and you're doing it for real, and there's technical issues that you never would have thought of before, it's disheartening, right?
It is. I think first time I ran into a technical difficulty sound-wise, it took some thinking for me to figure out what was going on. And it was a cell phone, too close to a microphone. Like, it's crazy that a microphone will pick up an incoming signal. Like, the phone isn't ringing, it's not making any noise, but it will pick up that signal and it will make the weirdest noise with it and be like, all right, we're going to play this. Yeah. We're going to do this to you, and you won't hear it.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's between your microphone and your computer, not your microphone and your ears.
Yeah.
Now what's cool about the Yeti is I can plug my microphone into it, and I hear a little echo of myself. And if I listen real carefully, I can hear some background noise if I really, really wanted to. But I'm literally in a sauna right now as my studio, and the soundproof in like a sauna is wonderful, like honestly, for podcasting, because it's supposed to be well insulated to keep the heat in, right?
I never would have thought of that.
I know.
I went through some crazy stuff to modify my space here to absorb sound, because I am literally in my closet.
Yeah. You know what? All you needed to do was get a sauna, right?
If only I had the extra room. Everyone should have a sauna.
Everyone should have a sauna. I live in Wisconsin, so it's really nice to have a sauna in Wisconsin, especially in the winter. But now all my equipment's in here, and it is a sauna. Technically, no more, because I mean, okay, I could start it up, but there would be a fire real fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we just keep that off for good while all my stuff is in here. But yeah, the area that you record in matters, right? I just lucked out because I was like, I need a quiet space. Oh, hey, I have this sauna. Hey, a chair happens to fit like right in there almost perfectly. If I'm in here too long, my knees get hurt because they're literally like butted up against the seats right now. So that's the only problem I have. It's a little cramped. But sound quality.
Maybe modify the space of it if you're not using the benches, because it's not a sauna.
Yeah, but you know, we're planning to move sometime soon. So keeping it a sauna for the next residents definitely increases the value. So I think we're just going to keep it that way for now, and I'll just deal with it. And when I get into the new house, whenever that is, I have to figure out what to do from square one for my space. Because I guarantee there's not going to be a sauna in the next house.
Yeah.
Well, most likely.
Get yourself a really well-insulated closet. There you go.
I know, right?
Walk-in is best.
Mm-hmm.
So what has been the most rewarding part of the process for you?
Most rewarding. There's a lot of good rewarding things that have happened since all of this has started. I would say the most rewarding is the people that I've met. Like, hands down, some of the greatest people on the face of this earth that are just passionate about podcasting or passionate about role playing. Just their intense passion kind of bleeds through not only their posts on Twitter, but when we've talked, you know, face to face, doing recordings or going to conventions and meeting in person. These people have just been phenomenal and just phenomenally accepting in my immediate area of the community. which is really, really cool.
It's a really good thing to hear too. Like, and you can, like I said, you can see it on Twitter, but when you have a chance to sit down and game in whatever format you're able to, it really shines there. So
Exactly.
it's great.
Yeah.
When I first started gaming myself, it was in person, and the passion there, like my first DM has a couple homebrew worlds he's been working on for 20 odd years now, and just the dedication there. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's wild to see what some people put into this hobby, and the passions that show through in the work that they create. It's kind of remarkable. And when you cross that passion for the role playing hobby with a passion for podcasting and get together with other podcasters to create really cool stuff, it's basically just magic that happens. And I'm kind of reminded of last year's International Podcasting Month in September. I was good friends with the person that ran that, Tess, and she did it all by herself that year. And there was like 50 some odd episodes or something like that that came out all in September of well over 70 podcasts that have banded together to create content, actual plays and audio dramas. And I kind of went a little, I don't know what the word would be there, but I went a little overboard, I guess you could say. And I did everything that was offered. I ran a game and edited my first actual play. I played in the game, and I created an audio drama. The first time I've ever done anything like that, including writing it, casting it, editing it, doing the sound design for it, all of that. And the people that I worked with on all of those projects, absolutely phenomenal. Just some of the best people that I've come to know, and it's been that experience pretty much through everybody else's projects that had released stuff that year. And now IPM 2019 is gearing up, and people are starting to record with other people and starting to create these really cool things. It's a bit more structured than last year. There's an actual team that's running it now, but the whole idea of people coming together just to create cool stuff for the sake of creating cool stuff, not for money, not for fame, just because we love the heck out of it, that's awesome.
It's yeah. Well, and it goes back to the ability to share what we're doing and be like, hey, we're doing this cool thing. Want to see this cool thing? Come see this cool thing. And like, yeah, I want to see this cool thing. So it's just, when I go through Twitter and I see the amount of excitement, I just kind of picture everyone as excited school kids on the first day of school talking about their favorite things together. It really reminds me of that. It's just, it's really wholesome. So
it is. Yeah. And it's funny because like there's projects and there's like podcasts and stuff for pretty much everybody, all sorts of tastes out there. And I'm really delighted to see nowadays, speaking of school kids, a lot more family friendly podcasts starting to come to the forefront. I could name three, some of my favorites right now. D20 Dames, Fate and Fable Maidens, both D&D actual play podcasts, who are also all women. And also Autonomic podcast. That one's a pretty new one by Cat Cool. That one is actually played by adults, geared towards kids, but all ages appropriate. And then Character Creation Cast from the beginning has been family friendly. No swearing, nothing too dark in terms of the topics that we cover, but it's never really been an issue yet. The swearing has, because I've had to do some editing, but out of that came a really fun swear filter that I kind of throw into the outtakes every now and then. But seeing all these like family friendly things coming out nowadays and being able to reach those the younger audience, where parents that had grew up in the 90s and the 2000s playing these games, seeing their kids now getting into these games and getting into podcasts because it's a cool hobby, both podcast listening and playing cool games. It's kind of something to treasure, and I'm really happy that we have more content to pass the baton down to the younger generation without them having to feel ashamed for listening to something that's, you know, rated much more mature for their age group.
Well, there's that, and then there's just 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Being into this stuff wasn't cool, and the amount of harassment you could get from people, and the fact that that has changed so much, and it's great, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's on one hand a little bit jealous. You know, it's like you get to grow up in what I wish I could have had. I wish I could have played this stuff, assuming stuff had gotten off the ground then, and not been teased mercilessly because I wasn't on the cheerleading squad or whatever, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Like high school politics back in the 90s, I imagine high school politics probably haven't changed too much. But at the very least, being a nerd, being a geek, is not as ostracized nowadays as it was back in the day. You've got people, instead of like, they're the nerdy kids, they're by themselves all the time, they're with each other. Then there's the jocks, and then there's the music folks that sometimes blend with the nerdy kids. Because a lot of music folks are nerdy as well. And I love that so much. And nowadays you've got nerdy jocks and jockey nerds, you know, or whatever.
I think that's a fair way to put it.
There's a more of a blend, which it's really cool to see that people can cross over those boundaries without feeling ashamed.
Yeah.
You know?
And those boundaries, they suck so much, and it's great to see them starting to break down. And it's a good basis moving forward into adulthood and stuff. Breaking down those barriers in high school, I feel, will make this upcoming generation so much stronger and better as adults than even with our awareness and stuff that we have. They're going to be even better.
Yeah.
So.
It's a really, really amazing trend that I'm seeing with kids, that they're not existing with malice in their hearts like some kids used to. They have a more worldly view because the world is at their fingertips through the internet. And that sometimes the internet, the anonymity of the internet, all that sort of stuff can breed some really heinous activities for some people, but there's still a lot of kids out there that are, and more nowadays, that are growing up and being cool and not harassing other people and just wanting the world to be a better place. And if that generation is starting to accept it, the next generation that they raise should accept it even more, in theory. And seeing that trend go upwards and being alive for that turning point in history is pretty wonderful.
Yeah. So what has it been like working with Amelia as your co-host for Character Creation Cast?
The best. Amelia's been my rock in this process. I know she's very open about her mental health issues and everything. And she actually took a month break recently from the podcast duties to help sort all of that out because of things piling on top of one another. And that month, I got some guest hosts to come help me out with the episodes, but it wasn't exactly the same. It wasn't bad, obviously. I had fun with both guest hosts that had joined in, but not having Amelia there was like a part of me was missing as I was creating this content, right? I had to do all the outlines myself because she can just look at the outline and it gets done somehow. Like, I don't know how she does it. And I'm sitting here taking days to like, well, okay, what question should I ask? Okay, well, I need 2 more questions, but I have no idea what to ask. So this sounds good enough. It worked out, and the interviews were great, but it was just missing that little extra that Amelia brings, and she's got this snark that is just like chef's kiss, right? That complements my, I guess, laid back approach to hosting, and it works out so nicely when I'm over here creating all the goody two shoes and she's over there creating all the backstabbers. That it really makes for some really entertaining listening to see the dichotomy there. At one point, funny story, I was recording for Headspace, a game by Mark Richardson. And I was recording with Senda and Phil from Pandas Talking Games because they both loved the game. Phil's like huge into cyberpunk. He's doing his own hydropunk role-playing game called Hydra Hackers Operatives, which if you abbreviate it, it's H2O, which I think is super clever. And we got to a point where it's like, you're supposed to be creating bad people. That's the point of this game, is you create bad people and you try to redeem yourself. And I'm like, but no, he has to be good. After that episode, or after that recording for that series, Amelia was like, okay, next one that we do, I want you to make a really bad person. I'm like, all right, I'll try it out. We'll see what happens. The next recording was Deadlands Reloaded with the Sounds Like Crows crew. That's a actual play podcast that does that plays Deadlands Reloaded. There's a lot of like issues with the general story of the game, but the game itself runs off of the Savage Worlds game system, and it takes place in the weird West. Right? It's like this alternate history where all this magic erupted in the world, tore things asunder in the U.S., and the West of the U.S. is like this effectively hellscape of just wild magic, dragons, weird stuff happening, all sorts of stuff like that, right? But it's like,
wild.
yeah, and it takes place in like the 1800s or something like that, and you play as, Western folks, right? Like gunslingers and priests and all this other like normal stuff. But oh, by the way, there's this really weird stuff that's happening over there. And there's this fuel that we discovered. I think it's like called ghost rock because when it burns, it screams. Okay. So really weird setting. And I was like, okay, I got to make a bad dude because I said I was going to. I'm going to make the worst guy I can think of, and he's going to be this like top shot gunslinger guy that loves a murdering and a stealing, right? And I named him Dirge Stranglethorn because that's got to be the most like cartoon villain name I could think of. And he kind of broke me.
Oh no.
I made him too bad. I think I described him once as he's a little bit naughty, right? He just loves murdering people, and that's his pastime. And every single character I've made after that point has had some major like flaws with them. Instead of like goody two shoes, it's quote unquote a little bit naughty of a character, right? They do bad things sometimes, and they're okay with that.
I think that's important though. Like a lot of people are scared. A lot of sheets will have a flaw section, but especially newer players, there's a lot of timidity when it comes with actually playing out and playing off of those flaws. You know, because it's this idea that doing this is going to turn your character into a villain, or they're going to understand the villain more. And I'm like, isn't that a good thing? Mm-hmm. But that might be part of the reason why I regularly get branded as villain into things anyways. I can't take a single one of those themed personality tests that have a good/bad side without landing on the bad side. Yeah. I am a Slytherin. I am a Sith. I am a Lannister. I am... And it's like, but this isn't me. And I'm like, recently I've been able to accept, okay, but I look at these people and I see their redeeming qualities and I see that they're not the worst thing ever. So maybe I really am the bad guy. Yeah, and that's kind of how Dirge was. Is I created him as this like cartoonish villain, effectively, and created him in a game where you're supposed to be working together as a team, right? How does a cartoonish villain that just loves murdering and stealing, and gambling occasionally and cheating at gambling because then he can kick over tables and murder more people, right? How does that turn into a hero? We actually did a panel at a Catacon in 2018. 2018? Yeah, 2018. Going over exercises from James's book, where it's like how to expand the backgrounds of your characters. That's what the book's all about. And we expanded the background on Dirge. And turns out he's a lot more complex than I had originally thought. And he just wants a family. And since his families have been taken away from him his whole life, that's why he has such an outlet to murder everybody else, apparently. So Dirge, he loves a killing, he loves a stealing,
and he loves a feeling things.
When you get down to the psychology of stuff, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how creating characters, a lot of times you don't even think about those things as they come up, but you do because you do them,
Yeah.
because it's just, whether we're aware of the psychology behind the stuff we create, some part of us sees it and it's like, this is how these things balance out. It's not just necessarily that this character is bad just to be bad. The scariest villains are the ones that we can connect to on a deep level, and we're like,
yes.
But they aren't that bad. I love that. I love a villain that I can sit there and feel really, really bad about when I have to kill them.
Yep. So. Oh, yeah. The villain that you can see is feeling that they're in the right, and you can see from their point of view, yeah, they are. Those villains are terrifying, because it's like it makes you kind of introspective on yourself. Like, if I was in that person's shoes, would I be doing the same thing, even though I'm the hero right now?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's terrifying.
Well, and conversely, how often is that if you were in those shoes, yeah, you're definitely the hero then. From that perspective, that's one of the things I loved about how they portrayed Thanos and how they really brought that at the end. It's like, this, yes,
yeah,
this is perfect.
Yeah, it made sense, and it's like he felt he was the hero, and to do unspeakable things because he felt he had to, right? I don't want to give spoilers away because relatively recent movies. I would highly recommend them if you're listening to go see them if you have not yet. But yeah, that villain was so chilling because of the whole, I know what I'm doing is right because it will save the entire universe, right?
Yeah.
So it's having that sort of thing, like if you're a GM, having that sort of like mentality for your villains, for your player characters, really, really kind of deepens the intensity that your characters and your players will feel playing in that sort of campaign. And players having flaws that you can embrace, it doesn't have to be as extreme as Dirge, but having those flaws that you can embrace really gives you story arcs. Like, even if it's a bad flaw, like I just indiscriminately kill people because it's fun, you can get redeemed from that. And I can definitely see Dirge's story being one of redemption down the line, right? If I had to play that character, I would start out very, very mean, and I would try to start out very, very mean. I may not be 100% successful at it because it's really hard for me to be that way, but going from there, learning to be a team player, having forced to like work with these people and effectively have friendship thrown upon him, I can see that changing him.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And maybe eventually laying down his guns and trying to start a family. Which, spoiler alert, he tried once, and his ex fiance, who he left at the altar because he wasn't ready, killed his new family with a pack of trained Tyrannosaurus Rexes that she had raised.
See, that sounds like something I would have done as DM too. It's like,
right.
He finally redeems himself. All right, let's break him again.
let's twist that knife a little bit.
Yeah. So, and back to what I said. Okay.
Yep.
Fine. Not sure how I didn't recognize it sooner.
Uh-huh.
So you're also one of the creators for Chimera RPG. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Chimera. Oh my goodness. I blame Cinda Lino, one of the hosts of She's a Super Geek and one of the hosts of Pandas Talking Games, amongst many, many other things in the community. If you're not aware of Cinda, I don't think I can impromptu spell her Twitter name on here, but she's probably one of the only Cindas in the RPG community. One of the conversations I was having with her on Twitter led me to think, well, what if Dungeons and Dragons had superpowers, superheroes, right? I grew up with the Heroes Unlimited role-playing game system by Palladium Books, and that system is just 90s to the core, like tons of skills, tons. Oh my goodness, there's like books and books and books just of superpowers. Like there's 2 books that are literally just back-to-back superpowers lists and like random tables and all sorts of stuff, crunchy as all heck.
Ooh.
And I loved it. It was my first role-playing game, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of always, unless it's like exceptionally bad, you kind of always fall in love with that first role-playing game, especially if that's the only one that you knew for years, right? But Heroes Unlimited allowed you to create pretty much any type of hero. The character creation was very robust, and that's probably where my love of creating characters came from. That plus the 5-month period of time playing with my friends where we played every single Friday. I'd say, yeah, every single Friday for 5 months, I had a character death.
Oh, God.
So every single week, I had to create a new character for the next Friday to insert into the campaign. And they just kept dying. Like, I don't know. Like, some of it was my fault. Some of it probably was my friend's fault, trying to, like, you know, kill off my characters because it became a running gag after a while. Actually, I would say most of it was my fault because I was a pretty stupid player back then. Go in guns a-blazing and hope for the best, effectively. But then we got smart and like started actually telling stories, cool superhero stories. We had 3 players in the group, and we all switched off GMing, and we were all literally playing the same campaign, only different GM perspectives for every story, which was cool. Superheroes in role-playing kind of was in my blood. And from there, I was like, I want to play a fantasy game mixed with a superhero game. What would that look like? My first thought was, let's convert some superpowers from Heroes Unlimited to Dungeons and Dragons D20. How hard could that be?
That sounds really.
Just don't do it.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Don't do it.
Okay. So we're actually going to take a quick break. We'll be back shortly, guys.
Wonderful.
And we're back, guys.
Hi, welcome back.
So we were talking about applying a hero system to Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. So D&D, fairly crunchy. Heroes Unlimited, extra crunchy, right? Combining the two was a nightmare. Like I tried for like maybe an hour, and I was just like, this is not working. It's just not going to work because the conversions are like apples and oranges. It's just not going to be interesting, right? So then I thought to myself, well, if I can't do it with these systems, what can I do? What's out there? I believe at that point I was starting to listen to a podcast called Protean City, which uses the Masks role-playing game. And Masks is a game that is powered by the Apocalypse. If people aren't familiar with that, that is any game that's an offshoot of the structure that Apocalypse World had created back in, I believe, 2005 by Vincent and McGay Baker, where the premise of PBTA is very simple. It's you have effectively like a series of moves that are triggered by conversation that you have back and forth. So instead of saying, I'm going to use my attack ability, you say how you attack. And then the GM will say, it sounds like you're trying to use this attack move. Go ahead and roll for it. And then the rolls in PBTA traditionally use 2d6. And on a 6 or less, it's called a miss. That's something bad happens. The GM gets full control in those instances, right? On a 10 plus, it's a full hit. It's a success. So you pretty much get what you wanted out of the move, right? Not too many consequences in most cases. On a 7 through 9, that's where the really interesting stuff happens. That's called a partial success. That's where you get what you want, but it's probably going to come at a cost, depending on the game and the move that you're using. So I kind of really liked the whole conversational aspect of it. This podcast that I was listening to, it's a superhero podcast, follows the adventures of teen superheroes in Protean City, which is a city that they made up just for the podcast. And they run it like a comic book series. So like they describe panels and different poses and stuff like that. And it's really got this awesome flavor to it that really pulled me in. And I'm like, what if I created something for PBTA that blended these genres together, this superhero genre and fantasy genre? I'm sure it's probably fine because it's all about having a conversation, triggering these moves, rolling the dice when the moves are triggered, and having a resolution for the moves. So pretty much all the genre is the flavor and the story, right? You don't have to worry too much about mechanics, was my initial thought. So basically, that turned into me feverishly listening to podcasts like Plus One Forward, where they go over different Powered by the Apocalypse game systems, kind of pull them apart and take a deep look at them and how they tick and how moves work, all this sort of stuff. So very academically, I sat down with a notebook and a pencil listening to these podcasts very specifically to learn what is PBTA and how does it tick, right? And the first game that I threw together was the pre-alpha version, as I like to call it, of Chimera, where effectively I threw everything, including the kitchen sink, into the game because my thought was, okay, it's got to have these moves. All right, bam, it's got moves. It's got to have abilities. Bam, it's got abilities. But my 90s brain was like, well, it's also got to have like hit points, right? Or something like that. It's got to have these other things that you can work with. It's got to have rules for how does your character die and how do you avoid death, because one of the big things in fantasy is like dying and questing to resurrect your fallen companion or something like that, right? That's like, I've played D&D, I've played Heroes Unlimited. I know kind of what those genres entail, and I want that feeling to be evoked in this game. So I threw so much garbage in there. My goodness, it was bad. Like, I had, because I wanted it to feel like a game, quote unquote, and I've never played Powered by the Apocalypse games before. I have only listened to stuff being played. And let me tell you, if you're designing the game based on just stuff that you have listened to, that's going to be a hard thing to accomplish, getting the proper feel of that type of game if you're doing Powered by the Apocalypse or something based off of a different system, like maybe an offshoot of D20 type systems like D&D, right? It's interesting when I went to run the game for the first time at a Catacon in 2017. That was my first experience playing a Powered by the Apocalypse game, was running my own game. And I was very thankful to have people that wanted to play test my game, friends from online, that were experienced with Powered by the Apocalypse and how it was supposed to work, right? So the first playtest experience was almost a train wreck because mechanically the game was garbage. Like, there was too much to keep track of. You had to look up table values of how much damage points your weapons do based upon a descriptor and some other stuff. And it was like a grid based thing that put you down to a certain value. And then you had to do the same for the opponent's armor. And then you compared the two and subtracted, and there was like all this stupid math.
Oh god, Thaco, but weirder.
Yeah, it was really weird. Like, I was like, this sounds like a game. It looks cool, sure. I kind of know what I'm doing, right? I had no idea what I was doing. And this was my first gaming convention too, so I never really had the opportunity before 2017 to actually play any of these types of games, like Crunchy D20 3.5 D&D and Crunchy D20 D100, I don't know what you call it, Heroes Unlimited, were my go-to. So this game was very crunchy. But what's cool is the comments that I got were the genre blending worked. The genre blending was cool. We played it the next day, and I threw out the crunch, right? It was still technically there on the sheets, but I just estimated everything. They said, okay, I attack, and I'm like, okay, this stuff happens, and whatever. And it went a lot smoother. It was a lot more enjoyable. The story that we told was really cool because we kept the same characters from the first playtest. We just made it better, right? We made the experience better. I had learned. And then I played Descent into Midnight, which is another Powered by the Apocalypse game. If people aren't familiar with that, I don't know if there's an easy explanation for what this game is all about, but you play as aliens on an alien world, completely underwater, that fights a corruption that's encroaching on their community.
Sounds
it's a very
about how their creator actually described it. We did have him on our podcast as well a couple weeks back. So
which one?
Jeez.
I know there's three of them. There's Richard Crace Landry, Taylor, and
Taylor. It was
Taylor. Oh, Taylor's awesome.
We've got Howard coming up in the future.
Rich Howard?
Yes.
Oh, he's such a good. Okay.
Can't wait.
I'll not go on a tirade of how amazing Rich Howard is, but I'll just say that playing Descent into Midnight like flipped a switch in my brain. It told me how PBTA was supposed to run, and not only that, it gave me some really cool insights into so much of it about the game, and I left the convention knowing exactly what I had to do to fix the game. Over the next year, Chimera transformed from this like mashing two genres together into throw as many genres in there as you want. Take the genre modules that we're going to be creating, right? Pick the ones that you want and make a game out of it. So now for the core system, we've got 3 genres that we have fully developed already. Fantasy, of course, which is kind of the Dungeons and Dragons type genre. Superheroes, of course, but also magical girls. The Sailor Moon type anime genre. And this is the wild thing that I love so much about this game. When you create characters, you take 2 character types, 2 playbooks, and you fuse them together. Every genre that we have has 10 character archetypes in them. So there's 30 archetypes in total that you can select from. You choose 2 of those and create a very unique character. If you want to be a wizard that is also a superpowered alien, you can do that. If you wanted to be a paladin who is also the leader of a magical girls group, think Sailor Moon, but with the power to talk to a deity and cast magic from that deity.
I'm going to say something here.
Yeah.
Some people say it's blasphemous. Voltron is magical girls with boys.
Yes. 1000% yes. Also Iron Man, magical girl.
Yes.
Transformation sequences. Yes. And yeah, there's so many tropes in magical girls that gets kind of ingrained in all of these other different genres, which is really interesting when you pick apart genre like I have for the past year and a half. It's so funny that you don't even notice it until you're kind of deep into these other genres. You're exploring it. This game that I'm creating with my co-designer, he goes by, or they go Amaraz on Twitter. This game it's turning into something super special because you can create these worlds, right? Part of the game is creating the world that you play in. What does a superhero fantasy magical girl world look like, right? And what do your characters look like in that world? Now, you could play as one person on your team as a magical girl and the rest are not, right? Why? And answering those questions is super interesting. And it's the play tests that we've had since the revamp have blown my mind, right? The very first play test, halfway through the revamp of the entire system, was with my 2 friends in person, and they blended fantasy with superheroes and said, the world we're playing in is a post-apocalyptic wasteland because that's modern superheroes. mixed with the tropes of fantasy where there's monsters roaming this vast wilderness, right? And we're going to be fighting vampires because vampires are plaguing our community. And that kind of turned into this like really cool, just 2-person adventure that we just made up on the spot. And for one shots at conventions and stuff, I can't prep anything, right? As a game master, I can't go in with a preconceived notion of what the plot line's going to be like, because with 3 genres, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different possible blends of those genres alone. And then countless more blends of the different character pairings. And every character type adds more to the story and adds more to the world based on the questions that they answer. So once you're done creating characters and creating the world in this game, you've got all the information you need to hit some really powerful emotional scenes. It just takes a little bit to get there, a little bit more improv than a lot of people are used to, but I think the end result is something that's just magical, because collaborative world building, I've said this so many times in the past, collaborative world building is a magic bullet for getting players invested in your game. If they created part of that world, they're going to care about it instantly. So that's why it's in the game.
It makes sense, too. I mean, it's one of the changes that I have noticed in the short time that I myself have actively been playing, is the focus from combat-centric to world-building together and story-building together. You know, it's... Yay!
Yeah, having that player agency.
Some of the best books I've read have more than one author.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing. I mean, in a way, when you're playing these games and you're building a world together, I mean, if you guys are all taking notes, everybody sit together, you got a book by the time all's said and done.
Yeah. Collaborative, that's role playing in a nutshell. It's collaborative storytelling, right? Old school traditional style was the DM or GM would create an intricate story, an intricate world for you to play in, and you had full control over your character, and a little bit control over your character's background, right? And it was more of a thing of, all right, I created my character, I created my background, here you go, GM, do with it what you will, and serve me up a story, right? That seems like it's putting an awful lot of work in the GM's hands, whereas players just need to show up after that point and play their characters, right? Now you've got this full collaboration with each other, where the GM is just as surprised where the story is going as the players. And that's remarkable. To not know where it's going to end as the main story driver of the game is really, really cool, because missing out on that, like, oh wow, I didn't expect that to happen moment is kind of unfortunate when you're crafting the adventure, in my opinion. Obviously, perfectly valid way to play if you're having fun. But I mean, even the combat simulator types, perfectly valid to play if you're having fun. But for me, that whole surprise of just finding out what happens is something that's just magical when you share that with everybody at the table.
That sounds really, really awesome.
Yeah.
So, where was I? I'm lost. Okay. So, what have you enjoyed the most about the project, and what's your least favorite bit?
Probably the thing I enjoy the most for sure is seeing the creativity like just oozing out of people when they dive into this, right? I give them just a few descriptions of the character types. Well, this guy, he's the gadgeteer, kind of like Iron Man or maybe Batman. People who like to create gadgets or use gadgets. Okay. People have taken that and blended it with a wizard. And now they've got this techno wizard that's creating all these cool magical gadgets that are just doing these really wild things. Like, I think they casted a spell called roller skates on some dinosaurs that were coming after them. And then the dinosaurs suddenly had roller skates. And it's just like the creativity that's coming out of these people is just remarkable when you are just blending these genres together and blending the tropes of these genres together. Seeing that has just been like beyond joyous, right? So I don't think there's something that can top seeing the creativity and joy that people get out of playing this game. Least favorite part, let's see. I know the beginning was rough, but without that, I wouldn't have gotten to where I am now, right? So I wouldn't say that that's my least favorite part. I'd say not having all the time that I wish I had to work on it. Not only do I have a podcast, right, that we're doing weekly releases on, that takes time away, but I also have a family. I have a wife and two wonderful children, and I want to spend time with that family. And I also work, and my wife is a stay-at-home mom to take care of the kids. And thankfully, that setup works for us. It allows us to get by, and the kids are being raised well, and it just takes time. So not having enough time to actually dive headfirst into this is probably my least favorite part.
So definitely a work-life balance thing. I think
Yeah.
that's something we all struggle with, especially when we have hobbies and we're so far into it. And we're like, we just want to do this thing all the time and do these other things that we really enjoy. And how do we do this all at once? Can we do this all at once? And there are a few people who are in a position where they really can. And the rest of us are just like, okay, well, we're going to make time and sit there and watch you do all the things and be really happy for you, and at the same time a bit jealous because I wish that was me too. So.
Yeah, no, I get that completely. Somehow things are working out nicely. I had mentioned before the audio drama that I had done for IPM. Because of that, I wanted to create a series, right? So I created the podcast idea for a podcast called Side Heroes, right? The episode that I had released was the aftermath of my favorite character's death from Heroes Unlimited and her best friend moving on, basically, right? So it was a 15-minute, 20-minute story about my favorite character, Mishra, and her best friend, Amy. Mishra had died. It was a few months after that point. Amy was trying to move on. And she went into hiding in a different city because superhero, supervillain sort of nonsense. She wasn't feeling safe in New York anymore. And then she runs into the clone of my character, who had all the same memories as my character up until the point that she was cloned. And so the story progresses from there. And I thought, well, I want to explore this relationship more. maybe I should write more. Maybe I should start from the beginning. And so that's going to be the first season of this podcast, how their relationship develops. And it's going to be very like slice of life sort of thing, but all told from the perspective of this normal person who happens to be the best friend of a superhero. And that kind of exploded into, well, now I want to do different characters every season. And I want to do like 5 or 6 seasons because I've got this really wonderful idea for the ending based upon what my friend, who was the GM for most of those sessions, told me what he wanted to do had my character survived, right? So I don't want to give any spoilers away, but basically the series is going to follow different types of relationships from the perspective of the normal person who is kind of the side hero to the hero.
Yeah.
Right? I haven't been able to write a single lick of that yet. I was hopeful to write at least the first episode maybe 4 or 5 months ago. I said, okay, after a Catacon 2018, I'll take a little bit of a break. I'll work on Chimera until the next version's ready. I'll have the character sheets all laid out. And then in between playtests, I'll then be writing for side heroes, right? Hasn't happened yet because I haven't been able to finish the next version, quote unquote, until just recently. In fact, I'm still transferring data from the design documents to the finalized character sheets, right? Now that that's almost done, I can see all this time that I've been working on Chimera, now I can actually start writing. I can start doing this other passion project. But I couldn't do them at the same time. And I realized that if you stretch yourself too thin, things start suffering in all aspects, right? So I had to pull it back. I had to say, all right, side heroes is not something that's super time sensitive. It can happen when it happens, right? Chimera, however, people have played it. People want to play it again. I want to get this thing into people's hands. And so I've been putting a lot of work into doing that. And I also found that I don't have a good handle on the mechanical aspects of GMing Powered by the Apocalypse. I do it, but I don't know how to turn what I do into words on a page, right?
Yeah.
And there's like agendas and principles that you define for both the GM and the players, and there's like actual GM moves. You can't just do anything you want. You have to follow specific moves that only the GM can do, right?
That's kind of different.
It is. And you can't do certain moves. Like if they don't get that 6-, there's a whole list of moves you can't do, right? Because you have to stick to they call them soft moves and hard moves. Hard moves are like the gut punches, right? The soft moves are like getting you tired out for the gut punch effectively, right? I don't know how to translate that to the words on the page and in a way that's very easy for people to understand. That's why I reached out to people on the Character Creation Cast Discord, where I had done some live game design in one of the channels. And Amaraz was always one of the people that was there to help with my ideas. I'm like, hey, I'm thinking about this move, but it doesn't feel right. Here, I'll just paste the move. If you have ideas, let me know. And Amaraz and a couple of others on the Discord are just super, super helpful in getting things polished, right? Something that wasn't like lackluster in most cases, right? And I was like, you know, I want to start the GM stuff soon, but I really don't know what I'm doing there. I'm thinking about bringing somebody else on. And Amaraz was like, hey, I'm available. I would love to. I've been helping out anyway. This would be really cool to do. I brought them on, and we immediately started organizing everything. We like set some bullet points of what we needed to get accomplished by when, and we've just been kind of going to town. Now, Amaris has been in college, finals, midterms, stuff like that. Obviously, that takes priority. Now their finals are done. And Amaris is hungry to dive into the design with me, and we are kind of since then things have just been kind of exponentially being pulled together, and now we're getting to the point where we can devote the time to this project and we can help each other out, because having those two brains riffing off of one another on a pretty consistent basis has created such a different and wonderful game than I ever could have imagined.
It sounds really, really cool. And the fact that you're going to be able to get back to it and get it really going again, I know that's got to be exciting.
Super exciting.
What would you have done differently at the start if you could go back?
Probably play something before I started. I think that was the biggest lesson. Because had I played, I would have known before anybody got a hold of it what I was doing wrong and what I needed to do to make it right. On the other hand, everything that had happened brought us to where we are now, like I said before. But goodness, yeah, if there's anything different that I would have done, probably bring Amaraz on earlier, because it would have been faster earlier at that point, right? Yeah. It was kind of like my passion project for a while, and I don't know if I was just not thinking about the possibilities of working with a solid co-designer. But as soon as I got over that mental hurdle of you need help, ask for help, right? Going back to that, if you ask for it, things can happen. As soon as I asked for the help, I got the help, and things are better because of it. And now that we're a pair, we can keep each other on point. We can get this thing to completion. We are accountable to each other. And we can't just be like, well, I'm gonna take a break for a couple months, just because I'm the sole designer, right? And it'll be done when it's done. Now we have incentive because we want to get this done not only for ourselves but for everybody else that's out there.
Yeah. Is that something that's seen a lot with people who are working on projects on their own, right? Like, you know, we're going to take a break for a few months and then come back to this later. And
I think
is that
so.
Detrimental, possibly?
Doing projects solo is definitely viable, but you have to avoid the burnout, right? Burnout is such a huge thing when you're doing things all by yourself, because if you're just constantly going with breaks, you're going to get to a point where things become tired. Your creative energy is going to get drained a bit, right? And you need a break, because if you don't have that other person, that rock to keep you excited and to throw like really awesome ideas out of left field. Like, I never would have thought of it. That's amazing. Yes, let's do that instead of what I was thinking of because I was tired that day or whatever, right? Um, without that extra person there, it's a lot harder. It's definitely doable. There's a lot of games that have been solo designed, but I would say some of the best games probably had at least some form of collaboration with other designers.
So, what advice would you give to someone who is just getting into tabletop roleplay gaming?
Don't worry about diving in head first into everything. You don't need to have the most complex character if you're going to be a player, right? You don't have to know the rules from cover to cover to be a player. You don't even have to know the rules from cover to cover to be a GM, honestly. If you know that you have a story you want to tell and you want to run the game, you can tell that story as long as everybody knows that you don't know the rules like the back of your hand. And if the players are willing, they can help you out, right?
Yeah.
If they have the system knowledge, lean on that. Because you're there to have fun together. You don't need to have to worry about looking up encumbrance rules or grappling rules or like Shadowrun treading water rules, right? If people know what those rules are. So leaning on others is definitely helpful. Play with your friends, right? If you know the people that you're playing with, you're probably going to feel a lot more comfortable, even if none of you have played before, right? Even if you're playing with online friends, like if you have a rapport with people online, that's a lot easier than going to your local game store that maybe you've never really gone to much and playing in one of the posted games or whatever there, or going to a convention or a local convention and just diving in with people that you don't know. It's definitely doable, but it's, I would say, a lot riskier, especially for a lot of different types of people that if you get into the wrong group, and this is something I really dislike about some of the community around tabletop role playing games. If you get into the wrong group, you're going to have a bad experience because if you don't know the rules in certain groups, you're going to be either like eye rolls or people rules lawyering you into a point where you're not going to have fun. Or it could be honestly straight up harassment, right? So if you're playing with people that you know, you're a lot less likely to run into any of those sorts of issues. And play to have fun. Experiment. Figure out what you have fun with. Some people have fun with the tactical aspect of certain games. D&D can be run theater of the mind where you don't have a battle map, where you imagine everything, you discuss everything, you have a conversation with each other. Or it could be played with miniatures and on a big battle map and with set pieces and all this other stuff. And both ways can be really cool, right? Obviously, theater of the mind, less expensive. Don't sweat it if you can't afford it, right? There's ways to play without having to throw all your money away to play it.
Oh, yeah. And even if you have a hard time doing the descriptors to make theater of the mind work as smoothly as you'd like, you could get like a whiteboard and some like magnets or whatever. I've heard of people using little, cute little tokens from other things like figurines and stuff that aren't necessarily miniatures, and like, all right, this is gonna represent my character on this map that is roughly drawn out, and it's fun. It's fun. And it's
Well, yeah, that's like what my friends did back in the mid 90s or so. We had little sheets of paper and we would draw the map on there. And when we moved, we would erase it and move the little circle that represented our characters to the next spot. It takes just a pencil and a blank sheet of paper to create the maps if you didn't want theater of the mind,
yeah,
which is really cool.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. Even as much as more and more people are playing online, it's still very much a pen and paper game. Maybe your pen and paper is digital. Maybe it's not, but you can very much do it still. Just what? If you don't have dice, you could even say, all right, we're going to rock, paper, scissors it out. You know?
Yeah, there's definitely ways to play that don't require you to spend money. And there's a lot of games that are out there. If you play a game and you're like, I didn't really enjoy it that much, maybe it's not the game for you, right?
Yeah.
If the idea of playing a role, playing a character, telling stories with your friends, or telling stories with a group of people that you're going to be consistently with, that will eventually become your friends, there's a game that's going to be for you. I've covered 16 games so far on Character Creation Cast, and save maybe 2 of them, they were all vastly different from one another, like leaps and bounds, rules wise, leaps and bounds, setting wise, leaps and bounds, character wise, what you can create, the stories you can tell. And that's just scratching the surface of what's out there. There's games that you can get for free. There's games that you can pay hundreds of dollars for if you really wanted to. There's games for everybody. You don't have to think that I can only play this hobby if I'm playing D&D. D&D is a fine game, but it's not the only game that's out there.
I honestly consider D&D to be the gateway drug of them all. It is the easiest. It is the most known. It is oftentimes the most easiest to gain access to.
Yep.
And it's popular in media. That checks all the boxes there, right?
Yep. Yeah, so, exactly. Like even if you're playing a different game with people, explaining it to coworkers that are not in the know, like, hey, what are you doing Friday night? Oh, well, Friday night I'm getting together with my group. We're going to role play. Oh, role played? What's that? Well, it's like D&D, and they're like, oh, okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Right. That's all you need to say nowadays, which is awesome. It's become this pop culture phenomenon, and I love that. Of course, now it's the Kleenex of RPGs, because you're playing a tissue, not a Kleenex. Okay, weird analogy, but the branding, right? Kleenex is not the object that you use. You're using a facial tissue,
yep.
Right? Even if you're going for a box of Puffs facial tissues, people will call that a Kleenex.
Yeah.
Just like people will call your game of Descent into Midnight, Dungeons and Dragons, even though it's 100% different.
Yeah. It's the easiest way to get it out to people who maybe don't know as much. It's like,
yeah,
it's this thing, but not. But it's close enough.
It's close enough.
It gives you the idea. So.
Yep. And having that vocabulary is really great when we're talking with people that aren't in the know in these sorts of hobbies. And the really cool thing is that since it's becoming such a pop cultural sensation, right? It's becoming something that people are curious about, at the very least, right? And they say, I've heard of this. It kind of sounds interesting. I've seen Stranger Things. It sounded like they had fun. Yeah. Right? And
I've seen E.T. It looked like they were having fun.
Uh-huh. Exactly. Oh man, I forgot about that scene in E.T.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people do.
now I have to go watch that again to see that, because as a kid, it just looked like they were playing game, right?
Yeah.
But now that it's much more ingrained in everything, things that include that in pop culture have much more significant impact in society. You can go to Target and you can find Dungeons and Dragons t-shirts, right? 20 years ago, you probably wouldn't be able to. It's becoming cool.
It's great, and that means there's so much more stuff out there available to use.
Yeah. So don't be afraid. Main advice is keep trying games until you find the one you like. Everybody has a different taste of fun that they like, right? If you play a few things with the mindset of I'll find what I like, you'll get there.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So who or what inspired you to start playing tabletop games yourself?
This goes back to the early days of 1993, when my friend brought the middle school newspaper to me saying, Ryan, there's this cool thing that's happening. It sounds like this group wants to get together and play role-playing games. And I was a connoisseur of role-playing games like Final Fantasy on the Nintendo Entertainment System and other things like that. And I'm like, ooh, wow, cool. We can get together and play Final Fantasy or something, and we can talk about it, and that sounds fun. 13-year-old me was ecstatic. And we got there, and there was a few other folks there as well. And there's all these books, no video games. It was all Palladium stuff, and we had no idea what we were into. But one of the guys there, Nate Yealy, he said to me, "All right, this is kind of what role playing games are. Say you're a superhero that can control fire, and say you're walking down a dark alleyway, and at the edge of the alleyway, just beyond your vision, in the darkness, you hear a sound that sounds threatening. What do you do?" Right? And my mind's like, okay, I'm a superhero. Logic kicking in. I control fire, and it's dark. Well, I create a fireball in my hand so I can see. He's like, that's role playing.
Yeah.
And that blew my mind at that point. And after that, I was hooked. Like, being able to do anything based upon the story that you're telling was just remarkable. Like, going beyond the confines of moving around a grid map on a video game system to actually being a participant in the story and crafting it was wild, and I loved it.
See, my first brush, and I wouldn't realize it till years later that that's what it was actually the cartoon.
Oh,
I remember watching the cartoon and enjoying it, but not being aware that there was so much more to it.
Yes.
You know? So it's cute. It's really cute going back, and I think much better than the movie. That was years later.
What? That movie was class.
It's gold in its own way, but I will take the cartoon over the movie any day.
I actually somehow missed the cartoon growing up. Like, I think I was tangentially aware of its existence, but I didn't know anything about it. And I think I can't remember the timing, but at some point I was aware of D&D as a thing, but I didn't really know much about it aside from the video games that I was playing with it. Dungeons and Dragons, there was a game for the Genesis that I loved. Shadowrun had a game for the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, which I loved. Those three were some of my favorite games, and those were based on actual role-playing game books. And now I can look back on it and say that's why I loved those games so much,
Yeah.
because it transitioned from this hobby that I have grown to love, to like completely dive myself into.
Yeah, I totally get that.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go ahead and take another quick break. People in chat, feel welcome to ask any questions you have. We will be getting to those shortly. Meantime, see you guys in a few. So
Hey.
previously we were talking about advice that you would give to people who are getting into and how you were first inspired to start playing tabletop role-playing games. How long have you been a content creator?
I've actually only been creating content for others to consume since 2017. Yeah, 2017. That sounds about right. Started with Chimera. Early 2018 was the brainchild of Character Creation Cast, and that was my first podcast foray. But honestly, as a GM, as a player with a bunch of GMs as well, we were creating content all the time. It was just for ourselves, though. And really, when one of the guests that we've had on Character Creation Cast, James D'Amato, I think I mentioned him earlier. He said, if you play a role-playing game and there's a rule that you don't like or you don't understand, and you make up a rule on the spot for what your character is doing, you're a game designer. You made a choice. Even a small choice like, do I use the standard array for my players or do I have them roll? It's a very simple choice. Both are completely valid, but you're making a design decision of how you want your game to play, right?
Yeah.
Very small steps. If you keep on building upon those small steps as you're playing, as you are running these games, you're eventually going to get to a point where you could create your own game. You could create content online for others to consume, like a podcast. You could do an actual play, things like that. Heck, you don't even have to have ever played before to run a successful actual play. I believe all of the players on the Broadswords podcast never played a lick of role-playing before doing the Broadswords podcast. Victoria had for many, many years, but all the players had not. And they're creating some amazing content right now. So me being a content creator, yeah, it's probably been since 1993. I don't want to math right now at 1:15 in the morning, but really creating content for others to consume outside of my immediate circle, 2017, I would say.
It's a fair chunk. I mean, a lot of people are just now getting to that, so.
Yeah. And with everything more accessible, with podcasting being something you can literally record on your own, edit with free programs on your own, and publish to something like maybe like a free Square or a free WordPress page. I think allows you to do audio blocks within your blogs that you can use the XML for that.
There's also Anchor, which is
Yeah,
awesome
there's also
because
Anchor, yep.
it'll syndicate it to other platforms for you.
Yeah. So you've got options to publish your podcasts out into the world for people to listen to it for free. And so the money investment nowadays to get into this sort of hobby is virtually nothing if you don't care a ton about audio quality and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Even with a cheap $30 mic, you can get really, really good sounding audio if you are using that mic correctly.
Yeah.
So do your research, right? All you have to do is watch a few videos on proper mic technique for the type of mic that you have, and there's tons of them. I've looked, and you will be able to create good sounding stuff for relatively a little bit of money, right? So don't think you can't get into this sort of hobby if you have a story you want to tell, right?
Yeah, totally.
Because people are doing it every day. Even if you just want to rant about life for half an hour and do that once a month, you're creating content. And there's going to be people out there that will strike a chord with, and they will appreciate what you're doing. My philosophy for creating content is if one person in this entire existence, in the entire world, if only one person finds joy in what I created, then I consider myself a success. Everything beyond that is icing on the cake.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would be doing any of this if it wasn't for bringing joy to other people.
Yeah, and I think that's why a lot of us get into this, as a hobby or with bigger goals. The first thing is we want to share and watch other people enjoy it. And I think that's the biggest thing and the most rewarding when we hear back and we see that people are.
That feedback from listeners, from people that play the games that we create, things like that, that feedback is some of the best stuff that we as content creators can hear, because it gives us a boost, right?
Yeah.
It gives us that almost like a validation sort of thing. And it pushes us to be even better for everybody, subconsciously or not, because we know that people are enjoying it and we want them to continue to enjoy it. We want more people to enjoy it, because spreading joy should be the primary directive, I guess you could say, of humanity, of being a human being, in my opinion. If everybody had that as their primary objective, this world would be, I don't know, fixed, I guess you could say.
Definitely better. Definitely would be better.
Definitely better at the very least. So yeah, it's really cool to spread joy, and doing that as a content creator is just phenomenal, and I've enjoyed every single second of it since I started.
It's good to hear. So, what kind of things do you do to prepare yourself both as a player and a character before a game?
Before we actually start either a campaign or a one shot, I like to try to get into the background of a character, right? One shots are a little harder because, especially if you're working with pre-generated characters, it's really more difficult to say, well, okay, now I've got this character that I didn't make myself. How can I put myself into this person's mindset, right? How can I insert my personality into this person that I don't know whether or not would have that sort of personality, right? When I create a character, I try to think of what made this character who they are now. What in their past drove them to this spot in the story where we're going to be starting, right? And I take that information and I try to insert myself in their shoes, right? I try to see the world from their perspective effectively. Currently playing a monthly game with Victoria Rogers from the Broadswords and a few other people. And I haven't actually played a campaign in years, especially since having kids, because there's no time for a campaign. So it was really interesting, the experience of creating the character, knowing that it'll be a multi-session character, and then getting into their shoes by getting into their background. And that session 0, where we all talked and all connected our characters and all that sort of stuff, just cemented everything for me. That session 0 was the light switch of, I don't know if I understand this character, to I completely understand this character. And once that light switch was flicked, I knew exactly how to play this person. I didn't want to go overboard with the voice. I've done that in the past, right? But then it comes to a point where you're in and out of the voice as you're talking because you don't remember to get into the voice, or you're in the voice when you're saying what your character is doing and not saying. And then it just gets confusing. So I just kept my normal voice, and I think I inserted myself a bit more than I intended. And there's been some real emotional gut punches because of that. Just leaving myself vulnerable to the opportunity to experience this world and these other characters through the eyes of the person that I created um, is really special. And allowing myself to be vulnerable. Whereas years past, we've had emotional sessions, but I don't think I was ever like truly vulnerable during those sessions. But by listening to the content that others have created and hearing all of the emotion behind it, it had unlocked something with me within the last year or two that said, you're allowed to feel these things too. And whether it's like joy or sadness in the character, right? Letting that bleed through from the game to real life has been quite an amazing experience, I would say.
Yeah, I can see how it can help with that kind of growth, because especially when you're seeing it in other areas in the same space, and it's like, it's not just one person, it's a lot of people that can share that and feel that,
Yeah.
and express it. And I think the more we see that, the more we accept it in our own lives.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And that's what's so magical about role-playing games is you're able to emotionally affect one another if you are open to that possibility, right? If you can go into a session with some people that you trust and say, everything that happens, I'm going to be feeling and experiencing as my character experiences it. And if everybody at the table is doing that as well, and if the GM is a little bit cruel, you're going to feel some heartache. You're going to probably shed some tears, and that's okay, because one of the best compliments I could say about a story that you create with other people is if it can move you to actual literal tears because of how good things are, or in combination with like something that's really sad that happened in the game to one of the characters or something like that, to feel those emotions in person because your character's feeling those emotions, that's unparalleled in my book in terms of storytelling.
Yeah, and it's a blessing when that happens too, because
yeah,
it does take some really powerful stuff to do that. So within the tabletop community, we've kind of talked a little bit about experience about the more positive end and things. What do you think could improve?
It's starting to improve right now, but the biggest thing that I'm seeing nowadays is dropping the gatekeeping. The gatekeeping needs to go away. This is my game and it needs to be played this way needs to go away. It's if you're not doing it my way, you shouldn't be in this hobby. That needs to go away. There's too much of that still. There's a lot less than there used to be, of course. And I'm very happy that games are a lot more accessible, where if you find yourself in a group that does that and you don't feel welcome, you can definitely find another group that will make you feel welcome. It's just those groups that don't make people feel welcome to this amazing hobby and make them feel like they need to quit the hobby because they don't feel welcome. That just needs to stop.
That's something I know that can be really rough. I know
Yeah.
I myself have actually not experienced that. I've seen it happen
Mm-hmm.
to other people. But it's sad as someone who hasn't experienced it to see it happen to other people. And it's
Yeah.
like, why don't you come here and let me protect you for a bit? Let me show you this other group where that's not a thing, you know.
Yeah.
Nobody has to deal with that. And the
Mm-hmm.
fact that there is a move away and that there's calls for it to change, you know, that also can help as a guide to, okay, here are the people we want to be around. Here are the people that maybe we stay as far away as we can.
Yes.
You know? Not saying that maybe the way they play otherwise is wrong, but the fact that they're saying other people can't play for whatever reason is...
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. It's perfectly valid to play the way you want to play. If you're having fun, you're doing it right. As long as everybody else you're playing with is having fun as well.
Yeah.
Because it's a community thing. Unless you're playing a single player role-playing game, which they do exist, everybody at that table needs to buy in. Everybody at the table needs to be having fun. If somebody is feeling ostracized, if somebody's feeling like they can't feel safe at the table, either emotionally or even physically in some cases, then something needs to get fixed. Either people need to leave the group or you need to leave the group in order to find people that will mesh with your playstyle, people that will accept you for you, and people that will care about your having fun instead of just them having fun.
Yeah. And yeah. So I think we've talked about a lot of other things. We've kind of brushed up against different styles of play. So what is your favorite style of play?
Okay. So we had an interview on Character Creation Cast with Jim McClure, who's a pretty big name on the One Shot Podcast Network, and he's getting into producing games and stuff through Roll20 now with the Burn Bright system, which is really cool. He's got this 8 kinds of fun that he likes to talk about a lot. So we had him on to talk about these 8 kinds of fun. And I don't know them offhand, but I do know that the thing that trumps everything for me is the fellowship type of fun. And what that means is I don't care what we're playing as long as I'm with friends. If I'm with friends, I'm going to have fun. We could be playing the most boring game in existence, and I'm going to have fun with those friends because we're probably going to be making fun of the game together as we play it, right?
Yeah.
And that's what matters. After that, the story and the characters' personal stories, things like that. That is my I don't have an analogy offhand, but that's the thing that I like to consume the most. Having that story, having that ability to dive into a character and feel what they're feeling is remarkable. And I'm very happy that I'm able to start diving into that level of role play recently.
Yeah.
I do like tactics, though, occasionally. I don't necessarily love playing games with tactics, but games that do have tactics, I will put on my real-time strategy brain and just like, okay, what's the most optimal way to do this? Let's min-max the heck out of this thing. I am here for this. Let's do it. Let's win this game.
Yeah.
I can get into that mentality so good. It's not the way I prefer, though. But I can definitely enjoy it. So, even with me who loves the story, loves the characters, I can go 100% to I don't care about the story, I don't care about the characters, I just want to win this battle and do it in a cool way where I can utilize all of the pawns that we have over here. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this about covers most of the questions. We've got a couple viewer questions. For those of you who are in chat right now, if you have any questions for Ryan, feel free to post them, and we will be addressing those as well.
Yes.
One of them comes from Michael Wayne, who asks, so working with different types of audience, what do you have to do different for each type of audience?
That's an interesting question. For an all ages sort of audience, you need to keep in mind that kids, especially in today's society, are mostly not exposed to certain things quite yet, especially the younger kids, like 10 or younger. I would say between 5 and 10 is a great time to get into more of the family-friendly story-based podcasts because they're exciting, they're fun. They avoid cursing. I myself avoid cursing as much as I can in day-to-day life, so it's natural for me to avoid it in my podcast life as well. But also avoiding the really intense themes, right? You don't want to get too dark. You don't want to go Game of Thrones on kids, obviously, because we don't want to scar the little ones. My son, for instance, he's 3, and he loves Halloween because I love Halloween. My wife loves Halloween. We're a Halloween family. That's one of our favorite holidays of the year. And we go to the Halloween store every year, and my son loves it. But he gets a little scared afterwards sometimes. He gets over it, but some of the things there are a little scary. The little animatronics that jump out at you, he doesn't like them.
Yeah.
But he's like, the Halloween store had a full life-size animatronic Michael Myers from the Halloween series, just chopping away with his knife, going like this, playing the theme music to Halloween. And he gets a kick out of that. He's like, it's Michael Myers. Ah. I'm like, should we be worried? But so there's going to be some darker themes that you want to avoid with kids. For teenagers, if you're gearing your content towards like teens, you're going to want to probably tackle a little bit more mature themes, but also themes that can deal with them specifically. Being a teenager is all about discovering yourself, right? Trying to figure out what your place in this world is. And if the content that you're creating is about that, teens will probably love it, right? Because self-discovery, the story of going from nobody to a somebody, I guess, probably would really resonate. That's why a lot of young adult novels are geared towards that sort of storyline. And then if you're going for just the mature adult audience and not worrying about the kids, swear away. That's fine. Do some really wild, really dark themes if you really want to. Like a podcast that I really love, Turncloaks, D&D 5e, a really, really dark world. I don't think they curse too much in it, but my goodness, the themes are dark. Like, plague is destroying the entire world, and you're in the middle of all of this horrible suffering, and there's a lot of really bad stuff going on. Dark, 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 and heavy emotions. I would not recommend that for kids, but great adult entertainment for sure.
And I think that could be really, really important too. Especially when you consider the different audiences and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Another question. This comes from Bobicus, who also posted to chat as well. How do you play a character that has the potential to be annoying without actually being annoying?
That's an interesting question. There has to be a lovable part of the character. They can't be 100% annoying. There has to be something either redeemable about them or something that everybody loves, right? You could have the most annoying character. Maybe they have a really annoying voice. Maybe they do the most annoying things from time to time. But when it comes down to the thick of it, when it comes down to the danger, maybe they're the one that risks their lives to save everybody else without question. Maybe just having that one little redeemable quality to them might be enough to make them not completely annoying, right? And maybe you stack a few more of those on there, right? And then before you know it, maybe they're only half annoying and half like lovable. And that might be enough to be just lovable all the time, even when they're annoying, because you latch onto the good feels that the character gives from time to time.
Sounds like some pretty solid advice on that end. Bobicus also asks, how do you create good moral dilemmas that don't seem contrived?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's the obvious, like, do this bad thing or else this other bad thing will happen, right? That's kind of a moral dilemma that is pretty contrived, but there's interesting ways I guess you can do it. It's hard for me personally to dive into the moral dilemma mindset, because I tend to veer heavily towards doing the right thing, I guess. It's changing a little bit now that I've had a little bit of dirge inside me. But I think if you can put your character in a point where they are wanting to do the right thing, but there's no good options, I think that will get you to some interesting points in the stories, because when there's no good options and you only want to do the right thing, you have to choose one of the bad options at that point, right? And it's just a matter of how interesting those bad options are. They don't have to be cartoonish. They could be fairly simple, but as long as you commit yourself to, in your character's eyes, taking the lesser of two evils, I guess you could say, then seeing how that plays out, I think that could be really interesting.
I think that's a fair way to put it. Or something I like to do to lawful good characters is put them in a situation where someone they care about is doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Now what do you do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Like, do we report the person that I love to the authorities because that's the lawful thing to do? Or do we let it slide? Do we try to help them out without doing anything to get them in trouble? Yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can go with that.
Yeah, it's a fun one. It's again back to the okay. Here's proof.
Yep. Yep.
Tavern Tales podcast asks, dice rolling, fun or distracting from the story?
I would say fun. Story-wise, you can play an amazing game without any dice. I wholeheartedly believe that. You can tell an amazing story without any dice. The cool thing about dice is that it adds that level of, wow, I didn't know that was going to happen, to everybody at the table. I'm going to save the day by doing this, and then you fail. Well, you didn't save the day, and now somebody may be in dire trouble or something because of that. Or I'm going to try to save the day, but somebody else beats me to it because their rolls were better. Or I'm going to try to... There's so many different examples. Like, just being able to have that random chance helps take it from, we're telling a cool story back and forth with one another here, to we're finding out what happens as well.
Yeah, it's pretty. I think that's fair. Tavern Tales also asks, how long a hug is too long a hug when I meet you at Gen Con?
I think if it lasts more than a day, Kyle,
That's a long hug.
That is a long hug. I would say so. Yeah. Well, we need to be able to game at some point, okay?
He says, all day, buddy, all day. We can just hold hands and skip.
There you go. I'm fine with that.
Econ Blackmoon asks, cake or pie, and why?
Ooh, that's a wonderful question. Okay. Cake? Yes, cake. Because it has to be a very specific type of cake. I'm not a big fan of regular buttercream frosting. Homemade buttercream frosting I can usually stand a little bit better because it's not as sweet. However, whipped frosting is my kryptonite. If you give me a marble cake with vanilla whipped frosting on it, the nice, really fluffy, like not really sweet type of frosting, I could eat probably a whole slab of that, just because it's like light and fluffy, and it doesn't overpower your sweet sensors on your tongue. Although pumpkin pie with whipped cream is really good. I just have to say, that's probably my second.
Okay.
So it's really close, but I gotta go with cake.
Okay. Dodeka Headroom asks, what are the 1 to 3 weirdest characters you've made on Character Creation Cast?
Ooh, that I've made. Okay. I once yeah, I would say she's kind of weird. I created a singer, musician, performer who accidentally hurt the one she loved with this like old school magic tech instrument that she had been performing with. And as she was running away, she ran into the doctor that delivered the baby that turned out to be the reincarnated god that was the first one to be coming back. It was like the herald of the god's return, basically, for this world. And so her whole story of this is for the game Edifice, by the way, by Devin George. Her whole story of just going from like, I'm a musician who's singing about this prophecy to now I'm raising this child god, this child god, to hopefully usher in a new era of my people. It was a little weird of a concept, but I loved it so much. For my Edge of the Empire series, we had decided to pick our characters before we recorded, right? So we didn't have any clue what anybody else was choosing. I was the only non-droid in a party of 5. Everybody else created a droid. And of course, I was a Force-sensitive human. So here's me, Force-sensitive human, adopted by 4 droids that I don't know why, but this was like after Order 66 happened, so Force sensitives were on the run, and nobody's gonna care about some kid that's living with 4 droids on an abandoned separatist base.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Gosh, that was a weird character. I don't know if I can name a third one off the top of my head. I mean, Dirge Stranglethorn. Yeah, he's a little weird, but in a very straight and narrow, cartoonish sort of villain sort of way.
Yeah.
I think the dinosaurs that ate his family probably made him very weird.
Let's see. There. Bobicus, how would a character you've created react if a merchant was carrying a large caravan of food through a famine-stricken region to another, not yet famine-stricken region, that could pay for the food?
I would buy the food, like, without hesitation, and distribute it.
Sounds like a good way to handle that.
Yep.
And nope, there's one more after that. Okay. Econ Black Moon asks, pudding or jello? No why on that one, just pudding or jello.
I'm gonna say oof. I guess it depends on the type of pudding, but given the choice of generic, probably jello. Maybe. Okay, it's about equal. I can't decide. They both have their places.
Yep. Together. That's the best place.
What?
Yeah.
I can see jello and whipped cream. I've never tried jello and pudding together. I don't know if I'll be daring enough to do that.
It's good. I suggest strawberry jello with chocolate pudding.
Okay, I get that.
Yep.
I get it. Okay, I can see it.
Tavern Tales ask, what's your favorite dice type? D4, D12, D20, D...
D20s are nice to spin. D12s are almost nicer to spin. They've got a little bit more roundness to them. That's kind of fun. I'm basing what dice I like off of how I can spin them. I have successfully spun D4s before.
That's a feat. That's a feat.
That is hard to do, and it took a lot of practice, and D4s flew everywhere. D6s are pretty classic. I like those. I almost want to say D8s. I don't know why, but whenever I look at my sets of dice, I'm always kind of drawn to the D8s a little bit more than the others. And I don't use them that much. I mean, I guess quarterstaffs use D8s in D&D. That's about it. Well,
there's a couple others.
I think there's a couple others. And I'm thinking Heroes Unlimited, there was some swords that I liked that used D8s, I believe. So, yeah, they have their place. I think D8s, probably.
Ecom returns to the pudding or jello with favorite flavors of both.
Oh. For pudding, for nostalgia reasons, tapioca. Reminds me of the tapioca that my mom used to home make a long time ago. Jello, definitely green, of the lime variety, because that is the only legitimate green flavoring of any artificially flavored green product, in my opinion. Green apple can go away as far as I'm concerned. And I am very sad that Skittles does not have lime in.
Yeah.
That's my hill to die on.
So we're going to go ahead and make this one the last one, although I think it's a bit of an odd one. Tavern Tales asks, who owns more dice, Torn or Ryan?
Oh.
I've got like 10 sets.
10 sets?
Maybe a couple more, but roughly.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of the ones that I can see. And I think I have a tackle box somewhere there with at least probably a dozen more sets in.
I figured that would most likely be the answer. Is that definitely more?
Yeah.
I do have a bit of a dice addiction. If I could afford to buy dice every month, I am this close to doing a subscription box with Dice Envy so I can get more of their wonderful dice, especially if I have the luck to get loads of the sparkly ones. Give me the translucent sparkly dice any day. So,
there's a lot of pretty dice out there nowadays.
Yes, especially handmade. Oh.
I need to get myself a good solid metal set of dice.
There's a few great places for that.
I bought a set for a giveaway once, and I'm like, why am I giving these away? I love these so much.
Because you bought them for a giveaway, that's why.
I know I did.
What you do is you buy a set for a giveaway and buy a set for yourself.
No, I should have, but I didn't anticipate that I would have loved them so much, so now I got to get a metal set for myself, and maybe someday. Priorities are feeding my children first.
Yep. Totally understand that.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so we're going to take one more super quick break. We will be right back, guys.
Sure.
Okay, so we're back. We've had a lot of really awesome discussion with Ryan today. If you guys missed it, you do have a chance to catch it again later on Anchor and YouTube. Thank you so much for being on my show, Ryan. It's been great having you. It was. Oh, and I think I'm gonna have to check that thing out pretty soon. Like, both the things. They look great. Okay. So with that, whoa, that does not work as well as it used to. I gotta fix the thing there. Anyways, so if you guys would like to keep up with Ryan and his projects, you can find his projects at chimerapbta.wordpress.com, as well as charactercreationcast.com, and you can also find him on Twitter at twitter.com/Lord Neptune. This has been RPG Unlimited. You can find my show here on Twitch every other Friday, and then you can find this one should be on Anchor and YouTube this upcoming Tuesday. So yeah, thank you so much for coming out, guys, and we will catch you next time.